A popular TikTok influencer's son is gunned down at a gas station a day before his 19th birthday.
I know y'all's worried about me. And I'm getting through it.
But during the investigation, officials discovered the victim was keeping a secret that may have been the motive behind his murder, even coming as a surprise to his own family.
He comes from good people, and he comes from a good family and a good home. But sometimes that just don't matter, you know?
This is Inside the Crime, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. We're in Alabama for this crime. Ophelia Nichols is known online, specifically on TikTok, as Mama Tot. Her son was murdered in 2022. Fast forward to 2025, the man accused of murdering him turned down a deal from prosecutors as he's hoping to roll the dice at trial. On June 24th of 2022, 18-year-old Randon Lee was shot and killed at a gas station in Mobile, Alabama. Initially, when the case was reported, all the community knew was an 18-year-old was murdered at a gas station. Then Ophelia Nichols, aka Mama Tot, posted this message on Facebook. We're receiving an unbelievable amount of calls, texts, messages regarding my baby child, Randon. I don't really have a choice other than to do this. My son was taken from us last night by the hands of another individual at just 18 years old. He would be 19 today, but someone made the decision to end my son's life. They are walking around in my town, living and breathing, while my son is not. While me and my family are grieving the loss that no mother should have to feel, they are free. I've been up all night with this unrecognizable feeling of hatred in my heart for the person who ended my son's life, and I can't promise that'll ever go away. I know the days ahead are completely unknown, but the only hope I have is that this person is found and prosecuted for the murder of my son. Just a few days after Randon's murder, investigators revealed surveillance video captured the murder, but there were more details that stuck out to detectives, like that Randon knew his killer.
The suspect both and the victim pulled up at the pumps. The suspects in the black vehicle got inside the victim's vehicle. We know there was one shot. The suspect got out of the victim's vehicle with a handgun and got back in his black vehicle and took off. The victim, which we now know is Randon Lee, drove across St. Stephen's Road and ended up at the Energizer gas station. We do know at this time that Mr. Lee had made his way down to Willmar and was selling narcotics to these two individuals. There was narcotics found in the vehicle whenever the crime scene unit processed the scene. At this time, we do have a couple of suspects in mind, but at this time we are not releasing any information on that. The first stop, gas station on St. Stephen's Road, we do know that he was shot actually there. Mr. Lee still was alive at that point. He drove his vehicle to try to escape the individuals from across St. Stephen's Road, and that's where he came to rest at the Energizer gas station across the street. EMS was called and they tried to perform medical treatment to him, and he died on scene.
Was the suspect's vehicle still across the street of the original gas station?
It was not.
Where was it parked?
They had already taken off. We do know at this time that Mr. Lee did have a relationship as far as selling to different individuals. It just wasn't them two individuals. We do know on multiple towns that he was selling, and these two individuals has bought from him in the past.
Like I said, surveillance video from the gas station captured the entire shooting. In the first few seconds, you see Randon's car pull up and go to the opposite side of the pump, right near that dark-colored car. Shortly after, you see a person in a red hoodie running towards Randon's car. During this point, the gunman shoots Randon in the back. Then Randon managed to drive off. The person in the red hoodie runs toward the dark-colored car on the passenger side, and that car flees. It was pretty tough for Randon's family to hear that he was selling marijuana. Even his mom admitted in a video posted to TikTok that Randon made some mistakes, but he didn't deserve what happened to him.
I know y'all's worried about me. And I'm getting through it. I made decisions today regarding my son's service. And through this process, we've found out a lot of stuff. We just didn't know. You know, when your children live out on their own, and excuse me, I'm a little swollen. I've got an abscess or something. When your children live out on their own, and, you know, pay their own bills, and they have a good job, and, you know, just don't cross your mind that they would be doing anything to get themselves into trouble. But we've been told that the detectives think that marijuana was being dealed, and my son was meeting there, and either they tried to rob him or they did rob him, but he was shot. My son had a lot of trouble after his dad passed, and, you know, just back and forth, just depression, like all kind of stuff. And, you know, we did everything we could to keep him on the right track, but this past year, everybody thought he was, because he was doing so good, like with everything. We just had a birthday dinner for him, and we was all telling him how proud we was of him. Just had no idea. He comes from good people, and he comes from a good family and a good home. But sometimes that just don't matter, you know? Sometimes that just don't matter. But what doesn't matter is anything. It gives nobody the right to shoot my son. That's all I know right now.
In August of 2022, nearly 2 months after Randon's murder, investigators got a break in the case. 20-year-old Ruben Gully turned himself in on a warrant for murder. That warrant was issued on August 4th. He turned himself in on August 18th, and by August 23rd, a judge ordered he be held on no bond. Even after his arrest, that still didn't bring closure for Randon's mom.
I'm getting 100 messages saying, "You must be so happy right now," and I am not. I am not happy. You know, when situations like this happen, or other traumatic situations, I look at everything. Everything. I don't just look at this and make a decision or an opinion. I look at everything. And when I seen that mugshot last night, I thought to myself, my goodness, he's just a baby. He's just a baby. And then I seen comments from his teachers that said, "I taught him in high school. He was a lovely young man." I bet he was. I bet he was. And that just made me think, within 11 seconds, he made the decision to just throw his life away. And there's one thing that he and my baby child had in common, and that was that they both have a mother that would do absolutely anything for them. I'm sure they have that in common. So remember this, there's now 2 families that are hurting. It's 2 of us. And those parents shouldn't suffer for something that their child did, just as well as I shouldn't suffer for anything that my children have done. What hurt me really big was when this all come out, the people in my town, people I grew up with, shop at the same store that they do, made such terrible comments about my baby child. I thought, why? You don't even know him. You don't even know him. And then I thought last night, Lord, I hope she don't go through that. Because I don't wish that on anybody. That was really hard for me.
According to a report by Fox 10, during a preliminary hearing, Randon's girlfriend told investigators that Randon sold to Ruben before, and on the day of his murder, he was planning to sell to him. Another witness told investigators Ruben and Randon talked over Snapchat, and that Randon even asked if it was okay to sell to Ruben. Last week, prosecutors offered Ruben a plea deal. The deal was for him to plead guilty to manslaughter in exchange for a 20-year prison sentence. According to Mobile County District Attorney Keith Blackwood, he offered the plea after consulting with Randon's family. But Ruben rejected the plea offer. According to prosecutors, negotiations broke down and Rubin wanted his day in court. Rubin's defense attorney reportedly told the judge he wanted it on record that he did recommend his client take the deal. Now he'll have to put on a defense, but it seems like he already knows what the defense strategy will be. The lead investigator on Randon's case was later convicted of perjury. Rubin's attorney told Fox 10 his testimony is going to be vital in this case. I'm calling him on direct, yes. I find it odd that the state's not calling him, but I know why, because he has a perjury conviction. The prosecution fired back and said they're ready for trial too. District Attorney Keith Blackwood told the outlet that's certainly going to be an issue that we have to deal with. Every case is different and every has its own unique set of issues, and we are prepared to walk through those. We don't believe that will be a fatal obstacle. The facts are what they are, and we're going to do our very best to prove those facts beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm joined now by victims' rights attorney John Phillips. John, thank you so much for joining me. Always great to see you. Now that we know that the trial is slated to begin in February, what do you think it could look like now that Rubin's rejected that plea deal?
You got to go back to square one, right? So the parties, the prosecutor and the defense attorneys, have to get back to depositions and trial testimony and evidence to kind of show, particularly from the defense side, what the defense is to this shooting. And it just, as attorneys, we often rest on our laurels as we think a case is resolved, and then we move on to the next case. And so you got to pause everything and go back to putting all the resources needed to get a case ready for trial.
Yeah, and it seems like the plea deal was made in kind of the support of the victim's family, that prosecutors consulted with them first before even offering the deal. How often do you see that happening, especially in murder cases?
It's always good from the victim side. I've done criminal defense and I've done, victims cases and certainly enjoy representing victims of crime more, with a huge asterisk is that that's not an enjoyable task, but I would rather be on that side. But, great prosecutors and victims advocacy is victim centric. But the state of Alabama, like the state of Florida and other prosecutors, represent the people, not the victim. And so sometimes the victim just kind of gets left out, particularly in death cases, because they can't speak for themselves. But here it's always good when the victims are kind of part of the team. And for political purposes, prosecutors are often elected officials, and they like that too. The victim standing there or singing their praises at the end. The law it includes the court of public opinion many times.
Yeah, and oftentimes we see people taking plea deals, especially because you're rolling that dice, 20 years for manslaughter as opposed to 20 years to life in prison if he is convicted. Are you surprised that he rejected the plea deal?
No.
Long pause there.
Yeah, no, they're complicated. And I've been in the room before where you're trying to explain to somebody that's proclaiming their innocence why it's in your best interest to take a plea. And if somebody's truly innocent, they're going to have the maximum amount of resistance to that, right? We've seen it many times where evidence comes out later and they're cleared, and then there's all these "I told you so's," Right. But a lot of times, people that commit crimes lie to their lawyers, or lawyers are kind of going to steer around the actual facts and go to the defense. The Florida bar rules, every state's bar rules, I'm licensed in Alabama, I'm from Mobile where this happened. Every state's bar rules give a little more leniency to criminal defense attorneys, when it comes to advocating for defenses, not necessarily strictly adhering to the truth because of the Fifth Amendment and the right to, against self-incrimination.
And it's so interesting too, because I've seen a number of cases where I'm like, oh my goodness, I believe that this person is totally guilty, and then the jury comes back and it's acquitted on all counts. We've seen that happen so many times before. So really, it could go either way. And I'm interested to see who would have more of an uphill battle in this particular case. Would it be the defense or would it be the prosecution? Because prosecutors say they're ready to try the case, but there's some credibility issues with one of the witnesses, an officer who was convicted of perjury, that the defense says they might end up calling as a witness. What do you think about that whole situation?
Yeah, that's where some of the best criminal defense lawyers earn their living, is impeachment of the state's case, impeachment of officers. I represent one of the victims in Y&W Melly's case. And I know the evidence that Y&W Melly was sitting next to and shot his friend. I'm saying it despite it all. But the investigation was bad. And then prosecutors did things that they probably shouldn't have, to solidify their conviction. And that's the best way to try a criminal defense case. O.J. Simpson, same way. Let's go after Mark Furman. Let's emphasize Mark Furman and the lack of evidence keeping, the lack of taking witnesses' statements, the lack of this, the lack of that, because that's where probable cause, reasonable doubt, I guess I should say, lives.
And then I know that prosecutors are probably going to rely heavily on digital forensic evidence, especially because we're in the year of 2025, even though this happened a couple of years ago. But I'm sure there's surveillance footage, there's the phone extractions, text messages, pinging of different locations. All of that stuff is going to be super important for the prosecution, I think, to win their case. But what are your thoughts on how important the digital forensic evidence will be, especially in a case like this with the defendant?
If people understood what these and these do, you probably wouldn't commit crimes you're trying to get away with them. Like again, going back to Y&W Melly's case, it's the cell phone that really consistently puts him there. And, even the steps taken at the time of the shooting, because we're walking around with pedometers. We're walking around with, my heart rate being monitored at all given times. And all of that data can be extracted. Cell phone towers everywhere has cameras. There was a case I looked at yesterday that, the guy would have gotten away from the cameras, from the crime, except for all the cameras track him coming and going. And it's like, we're in a digital age where, myself, I probably own 20 Ring cameras, between the office and the house. And, we're always feeding into some sort of logging of where we are. And that's generally, unless you're innocent, going to advantage the state and the investigators, because, they can get that data pretty easily, and they have a fairly unlimited budget, unlike some criminal defense attorneys, even at the public defender's office, who are, going to be limited.
And obviously, with us being months away from the scheduled trial now, that being in February 2026, can't believe this year is almost ending. But in terms of just the jury pool that's in Mobile, can you talk to me a little bit about that? Are they more on the conservative side? Where kind of do they land and fall, especially when it comes to a case like this, where the victim's mother is kind of someone who's very prominent there in the terms of she has a very huge fan base. She has millions of followers on TikTok. I'm sure some people have definitely heard of Mama Tot, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on the jury pool there.
My first job after graduating from the University of Alabama Law School was clerking for a judge who recently passed away, Judge Wood, at that courthouse. And as the law clerk for a judge in Mobile, you got to be in the jury room, before and after their deliberations. You got to talk with them at lunch, not about the case. You got to sit in trials, and Mobile's a small kind of good old boy network town. And that traditionally favors people like Mama Tot, right? You've got a white victim here that has prominence and a social media presence, and Mobile overall, South Alabama is a little different than Alabama as a whole. We're kind of like Florida in a way, but it's certainly such that you're going to have, a conservative, more stern disciplinarian jury than you would in some other jurisdictions, which, certainly is something disfavorable to the defense of the case, and probably something that was brought up in the plea deal. Like, even if you think we can present this, we're presenting it not to a jury of your actual peers, but what your peers are at law, which is just, people that can drive, that show up to jury duty. And that's often, more the victim's peers than yours.
And as the defense is kind of seems like they're maintaining their innocence, do you think it would be wise for Ruben to get on the stand if this case still goes to trial?
Ooh, that, it's tough to recommend anybody waive their Fifth Amendment privilege. And I don't know enough about the facts of the case to know what he'd say, but whatever he thinks he can do to outsmart the system or schmooze or use riz with the jury, to use a young kid's term these days. I recommend against it, unless you have an ironclad defense, which again, if you had an ironclad defense, I think that plea bargain would have been a little bit lower,
Yeah, because I'm thinking if there was an alibi, if it was possibly in self-defense, maybe this would be a different conversation. But it seems from the prosecution's theory of the case that this was kind of a cold-blooded murder. So we'll see how this continues to play out when this case eventually does go to trial. John, I want to thank you so much for your time and your insight into this case. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ruben Goley's trial is expected to begin in February of 2026. If he's convicted, he's facing anywhere between 20 years to life in prison. Thanks for watching this episode. Be sure to check out more episodes on the Law and Crime YouTube channel. I'm Elizabeth Millner, and this is Inside the Crime.